Woo! Coming hot off the heels of just catching Solo, a Star Wars story, baby, with, of course, the best. And you know who the best is. It was a great night. We had tons of fun. Best, of course, stands for Brian, Ellen, and Stephanie. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time. And wow. So this is something I promised that I would do, and that was a top 8 Star Wars starships. We've been doing this top 8 kind of science fiction series throughout the month of May, and this is the last one of the series. Now, I did tease during the Star Trek starships top 8 that I did that I would try and get Stephanie's and Ellen's picks on this, but guess what? They hate Star Wars so much they don't have a favorite ship in it. Just kidding. Just kidding. True. They don't. True. Of course, you can hear the boss. Woo! The lovely, hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy. You can hear her in the background. They don't hate Star Wars that much, but bottom line is they didn't really have a pick. So this is all me. And then maybe on the Star Wars update, which will be coming out over the next couple of days, I could get Rob's list from him for the Star Wars update. We'll see how that shakes up, because he and I are going to have so much to talk about this coming Star Wars update. Wow. But, you know, look... So this is getting released. We now have some numbers. We'll talk. I'm not going to do any spoilers with Solo, a Star Wars story. And there's no ship in it. Well, other than maybe one, but it's not new. There's no ship in it that's like a spoiler alert that's going to make this list at all. But apparently the movie's only done about 100 million. Now, I mean, that's a great number. Like, you know, just about any movie would kill for that kind of box office opening weekend. But for Star Wars, that's, well, considered by most to be weak sauce. But I don't know. I think there's so much competition out there right now. Like, you know, the superhero craze is really, you know, it's kind of the Star Wars of its day, you know, of today, really, as far as popularity goes and how all that works. So, yeah, like I don't necessarily think that this is a negative, what's going on, that it only did 100 million. I think Disney, I mean, ultimately, the movies that took money, that could have potentially taken money away from Star Wars, are, you know, movies that Disney runs. I mean, we talked about this on the live Hangout Q&A. So, anyway, yeah, I'm not worried about Star Wars' future as far as any of that goes. You know, with Solo underperforming what people were expecting. I mean, I think the initial expectations were like 150 million or something like that. You know, with it being Memorial Day, I don't know. Like, I mean, a lot of people probably just didn't want to go see a movie, and they were actually, I don't know, I guess they were barbecuing or something. I mean, and fuck Memorial Day, you know, like, I mean, it's one of two of the dumbest holidays ever. You know, to celebrate, you know, death is positively ridiculous. But regardless, yeah, I mean, again, I thought the movie was, you know, my official word for it is really good. Not great, but really good. And it definitely added on. We'll have, you know, there might be a little bit of discussion about Solo in this top 8 list of Star Wars starships, but not much, you know. But we'll save that for when we get to it. But regardless, this top 8 now, I'm only gonna allow one ship in this top 8 to come from the old expanded universe, because it was a quote-unquote ship that I just thought was so unique and so cool and such an awesome idea. No, it's not the Sun Crusher. That's not an awesome idea. Though, I almost gave something. Well, you know, the Maw, you know, now that's like canon, you know, thanks to Solo, a Star Wars story. And of course, we know all those things that were developed in the Maw. I don't think I'm giving away that's no kind of spoiler that I'm giving away by talking about the Maw here. But anyway, no, it's not the Sun Crusher. It's not what you think at all. But, you know, I'm going to allow for one of those. But otherwise, I want all of the ships, you know, in this list to be canon. Even though my number one pick, which I already mentioned in the Star Trek top 8 starships, you know, just happened to come up at the end of that episode. Even though my number one pick, really, it's prestige, and it's... The reason that it sits at number one has to do more with the old expanded universe than it does with, than it does with what it's done in the new canon, even though it exists within the new canon. Regardless, let's start talking this stuff up, and we'll start off with number 8. And at number 8, I'm going to get that old EU ship out of the way, and the ship is actually called the Basilisk War Droid. And I hope I'm pronouncing, I assume, yeah, I know I'm pronouncing Basilisk right, but the Basilisk War Droid. Now, this is really, really unique. And at some point, I'm going to implement this in some way in some of my fiction or erotic audio theater. Like somewhere within that, I have to come up with this kind of idea, and I'm going to think it through. But it's such a wild idea. And in some ways, it's so wild, I think it can almost only exist within Star Wars. And what it is, it's from Tales of the Jedi, which was the classic. This is a comic series that started in the 90s, where you had, the Sith War, you had Exar Kun and Ula Keldroma, Nomi Sunrider, and all that. And in that, you have this point, actually, it's during the Sith War series, like when Ula Keldroma gets convinced to kind of convert over who's a Jedi. And again, this takes place thousands of years before A New Hope. He gets convinced by Exar Kun, his one-time friend, to kind of become a part of the dark side and everything. And he ends up becoming the leader, more or less, of the Mandalorians of that time. And the Mandalorians, thousands of years ago, are just like these badass characters. I mean, they really, really are. And they ride these... they go through the stars. They're not flying in a bunch of Slave Ones. Again, it's thousands of years previous. But they have these... Well, they're not quadrupeds. They're like bipedal with like a lobster-like tail, I think is maybe the best way to describe them. But they're these robotic, well, they're droids, but I mean, they're like animals. They look like, I don't know, they look like they're riding elephants almost, but maybe not that size. But these things can, fly in the atmosphere. They can fly through space. And obviously the Mandalorians survive on only riding something because they don't have cockpits. You just, mount them like a horse. And the only reason that they're able to go through space with it is because Mandalorians and their armor at the time are, pressurized, and it works like like an astronaut suit or something. Now, I don't know that they could ever go into hyperdrive. They never really got into that sort of thing. But in fact, I'm pretty sure that they couldn't. But it wasn't, that wasn't exactly detailed in all of it. And I remember like looking at these things over and over again. They have like these big front-mounted cannons at what would be like the snout, of the creature, even though again it's a droid. Yeah, it was such a cool idea. The idea of effectively like riding a horse through the stars. That's kind of what it felt like, or maybe more particularly an elephant, because they were very large, war droids. And I just thought that was such a cool idea. The idea that you kind of rode this mount and the ship had some degree of, autonomy kind of AI, or not the ship. See, I mean, you can barely call it a ship, right? Because it's actually a droid that, it's like a droid, like a horse that you just ride wherever and, fly around in. Yeah, it was such a cool idea. And when you see like in the pages of, Tales of the Jedi, when you see like just this flock of them, again, because they're flying, so flock would not herd so much. You see this flock of them, like, coming in, they just start all blasting from the front of them. I mean, it was so cool. I really, really loved that. I mean, such an ingenious little idea, the idea of having effectively, a horse that you ride through the stars. I mean, that's really what it was. And it fit in well with kind of that nomadic concept that used to be a big part of, in the old expanded universe of how the Mandalorians acted, really up until you get to, when Clone Wars finally came out. So very unique idea, but again, I really, really like that. I mean, and that's far beyond anything that any other science fiction or even, more fantastical show had done, even animated shows. You think of shows like Brave Star, right? Where, yeah, sure, they had robotic horses that had some degree of intelligence and everything, but Brave Star, he wasn't exactly flying his horse through the stars, as to where the Mandalorians were with their Basilisk War droids. So, yeah, again, such a cool idea, even though completely impractical, right? Because, how are you handling just because you're wearing this very specific suit of armor? You're handling all the G-forces and everything else that comes along with, and all the heat, right? Like, I mean, of going through an atmosphere. how are you handling that? Like, that just doesn't make sense. So that's why I say it's one of those things that can really only exist in Star Wars, because time and again, Star Wars likes to ignore science in general and only uses it when it, forwards the story in some way. But really, really cool idea that I very much, that I really enjoyed and really stuck with me. And really, other than like seeing kind of the ancient Jedi and everything in the Tales of the Jedi series, the Mandalorians in that and getting some like history on the Mandalorians was definitely I think it was the big attraction for me to that series. Like when you find out about Mandalore 1 and all that and how that got passed on and everything. I mean, that was really, really cool. And it was also cool, with Exar Kun, the character of Exar Kun, who wasn't in charge of the Mandalorians, again, that was Ula Keldroma, but Exar Kun was such a cool character because he was the first one to have a double-bladed lightsaber, which would eventually be popularized by Maul. But originally, it was Exar Kun, and like no one had ever seen that, and when the first time he ignites it, you're just like, oh, holy shit, what is that? You get all excited about it. So, and then, lots of really interesting ideas that would later get used in different implementations and more futuristic implementations throughout the Star Wars saga, really all came from the, just the brains at Dark Horse Comics that came up with Tales of the Jedi, because I don't think George Lucas really had any hand in what they were doing with Tales of the Jedi. And I think they even like to use the term Tales just in case they needed to say, oh yeah, well, these are ancient records, we didn't get it exactly right, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, Basilisk War Droid, we'll put that at number 8. But let's move on. And most of them, there might not be so much to say because they're not necessarily as unique. But this next pick, this one might shock people because it comes from New Star Wars, which is not known for a lot of its great starship design, and I don't think that all of it does have great starship or starfighter design. But I have to give it to the Libertine from The Last Jedi. The Libertine was the ship that Rose and Finn and DJ, and of course BB-8, escape in from Canto Bight. And, of course, the Canto Bight sequence is easily the worst part of that film. I mean, just by leaps and bounds. So pointless and ridiculous. And now, since they've done practically nothing to expand upon or give us any explanation of what the big deal was about the character of DJ, he's kind of disappointing, too. Even though in the movie, when they're on the Libertine, he lays out some pretty heavy truth that is true in I'm sure, that fits in well with the truth of the Star Wars universe. Along with, I think the truth in our own reality, don't join, right? I mean, that's great. It's great advice all the way around. And of course, he's talking about how, war profiteering and all this stuff, all of which I think are perfectly legitimate points to make. But they're kind of out of place in the movie. So it doesn't exactly, work. So anyway, the ship, the Libertine, that they get away in. Of course, it's like this luxury space yacht. It's not really a starfighter. It's what they would classify as a space yacht. What I liked about it, well, I appreciated the opulence of it personally. The name of it is fucking great because, the Golden Stallion, one of the oldest terms given to me by a Sovryn Tech listener is actually the Libertine in Chief. So a ship called the Libertine. Hey, that's great. Actually, I need to do something with that because I don't think there's any Star Trek ships called the Libertine, and damn it, I'm writing a Star Trek series, so I should be taking advantage of this. But anyway, the Libertine was such a cool ship. I mean, for those two reasons, but I actually love the look of it. I love the look of it first off, I love the idea of space yachts. I think that's cool. And seeing like more luxury vessels within Star Wars, which is a precedent, and this leads to one of the first things that I love about it, a precedent that was set in the prequels where, under the Republic, there's just so much. I mean, there's a lot of greed, certainly, but there's so much opulence and everything within the Republic that it showed you, kind of the effects of what ends up happening when the Empire really takes over. So it's a very, aesthetically pleasing looking ship, and it looks like something out of the prequels. And when you read The Last Jedi, the expanded edition, what you find out is that the ship is some odd, or maybe it was just in the visual dictionary where they talk about it. But anyway, you find out that the ship, at least at the time of The Last Jedi, is almost 100 years old. It's from like 60 years before, A New Hope. So it fits in that it looks like something that could have been in the prequels. It could have been in episode 1 through 3. It easily could have sat within that. The one thing that got kind of, and this is a problem with The Last Jedi overall, is there was a little too much in The Last Jedi. I feel like there's a little too much Earth influence. Like the guy or the company that designed the ship that is the Libertine it had like a very French name, like Gilles de Lanceau or something like that. And I was like, come on, guys, it's Star Wars. We really shouldn't necessarily, have the French involved. But, actually, so speaking of Solo, a Star Wars story, I talked about this in my review in episode 279 of Sovryn Tech. There is, now we do have, I think with, when you see in Dryden Voss's, his luxury suite that he's in that's aboard his ship, you see one of the skulls from Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls. This is something to bring up. I mean, maybe Star Wars is actually, like, this used to be, there's a couple of old taglines for Star Wars. One is the history of our future. Okay, that was like old marketing materials. Other old marketing materials actually gave a date for what year A New Hope takes place in. And do you want to know what that year is? The year 3000. So is this just the year 3000? If so, then that would explain, one, why there's a crystal skull there from Earth, and it is an Earth crystal skull because it's based off of what's in Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls. And only one, like, really in Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls actually looked like the alien, right? If I remember correctly. I mean, like, let's be clear here, folks. I've only seen that movie once. I saw it in theaters. I could never bring myself, to watch it again, as far as that goes. So, maybe it does make sense that there's like some French influence in all this now, because now Disney is giving kind of a date, or at least attaching the Star Wars universe to Earth, to shit that actually happened on Earth in the past, or, however that works out. I mean, but then, the mystery of the Crystal Skulls is just that. It's a mystery, and who knows what date is, and you can't time it, blah, blah, blah. But the Libertine would kind of point at something like that some more as well. But I think that kind of sucks. Like, I liked all the, ending with the on and all these other like science fiction-y names that Star Wars had established for so long. And coming up with its own names for hackers, like slicers, and for bathrooms and things like this. So anyway, yeah, the Libertine, really cool ship. The other thing I liked about it, so I love that it has this very prequel design to it. I mean, it could fit right in with, the little Nubian space yacht that, or star yacht that, that Queen Amidala was riding around in, right? But it looks a lot like something out of Buck Rogers as well. And that's what I really liked about it. I mean, it looks very much, if you took the wings, because there's like at the front of it, there's the fins at the front. If you took those fins and you popped them on the back and had them aiming downward, it would look just like a Thunderfighter from Buck Rogers in the 25th century. I mean, it looks exactly like a Thunderfighter to the T. So, and I don't know how much on purpose that was, but, I like that design. It makes sense. I think it's got a great look. So the Libertine will sit at number 7, on this list. But let's move on to the next ship. And speaking of Nubian. Yeah. And speaking of prequel ships, I'll tell you, one that I really loved, and from like the instant that I saw it, I thought it was so visually striking, right down to its color and overall its design. Just lent itself to something very unique and stood out from the utilitarian designs of the original trilogy. And that's from episode 1, that being the N1 Naboo starfighter. Of course, everybody knows this ship. I mean, it was one of the original kind of or it was a major part of the original promotional materials for the film, where it just has that striking yellow. Like that safety yellow that just stands out compared to anything else around. And then it has that chrome front. And I love that long tail. And they talk about how the long tail is actually a way for it to recharge and plug into, whatever is at the docking bay, in Theed on Naboo. Such a cool little ship. And if you played, 2 of the hottest games back in 1999. One, of course, was Episode 1 Racer, which was the pod racing game, originally for N64, but then would also get release on PC, and actually got re-released recently, and it's still such a fun game to play. Even though I think Racer Revenge for PS2 is the better game, Racer is awesome. I take nothing away from it. Where it was really awesome is when you played it in the arcade and you actually like hopped into the pod racer, and you had a much more visceral feel of it. But the other great game at the time, and it felt like a little while, even though it hadn't been that long, it felt like it had been a little while since we had a real Star Wars flight simulator, like TIE Fighter or X-Wing or X-Wing Alliance. We had Star Wars Starfighter, which was exactly that. You are doing missions flying around in an N1 Starfighter, and that was really cool. And you also had, you had the Rogue Squadron games, particularly Rogue Squadron 2 and Rogue Squadron 3, which you got to fly around in the N1 and those if you put in your you put in the secret codes and everything to be able to do it, or you unlocked everything to be able to do it. Such a really gorgeous ship. That's kind of the amazing thing, is the artistic style that came with the prequels. Visually, I really think the prequels are absolutely stunning. I get people have problems with the acting. They may have problems with pacing and story and some of the way that the story was executed. I think most people don't mind the stories themselves, in the abstract. But visually, like those movies, they are beautiful. Like what you're seeing on the screen is absolutely gorgeous. And I love the styling and everything that comes out of Naboo. I'm a huge fan of, kind of the Naboo culture in general, really. And the N1 just kind of shows that off, and it is, that battle scene in Episode 1 where the N1s are going after the Trade Federation ship. Like, yeah, people can say, well, what the hell's this? You got some 9-year-old kid or whatever flying this thing. Isn't that kind of ridiculous? Blah, blah, blah. Sure. But like the actual action itself is really well done, I thought. And I thought that, seeing the N1s in action was a really, really beautiful thing, and stood as being particularly gorgeous compared to what you're used to seeing with the X-Wings, which again, all of that far more utilitarian. So it stands out. And with the video game Starfighter, like if you played that, you know how much fun that was. Like that was really cool, especially at the time. It's still cool today, and you can get it on GOG and everything, and it's a lot of fun to play. But anyway, yeah, I got to give it to the N1 Starfighter. I also like the patrol version that actually is the blue and is like a little, I don't know, like the cockpit area is a little fatter. I like that. But anyway. So yeah, we'll give number 6 to the N1 Naboo Starfighter, and then number 5. While we're just going through Episode 1, even though this would have a lot more to do if you are a fan of, or if you are an avid reader of the books as well as the comic books, especially the comic books. Among other areas, got it, the scimitar, or what's called the Sith Infiltrator. That's also the name that it had, particularly at the time of when Episode 1 was coming out. This is the ship that Darth Maul is flying around in. Okay. And it looked really cool at that time. And when you find out that it has like a cloaking device and all this other, all these experimental technologies and everything within it, it is a really, really badass looking ship. It just is. It has a unique look, but then also it kind of reminds you of a TIE fighter in a way. Like it has it's a unique design language, but then also it fits perfectly with everything else that you see that's a part of, the Empire, even though it was made before there was an Empire. It fits with the design language that Palpatine had, and it just works. And like even, when it docks, say like when they're on Tatooine in Episode 1, and you have like the little speeder that can come out and all the little Sith, spy droids and everything. It just, you knew really cool shit was happening on that ship. And what you saw of it in the old expanded universe made it even cooler, to see, to see Darth Maul training in it and everything. That was really cool. But then it also ends up getting used much later on within new canon material. Like you see it in the Lando comic book series, which is still the best comic book series that Marvel has done to date, especially with the new canon. And it ends up, who's it? Chaneth Cha. I don't know if that's supposed to be pronounced Kenneth Ka or Kenneth Cha or Chaneth Cha. I go with Chaneth Cha, but she's a really cool bounty hunter character. And it was so awesome to have like Palpatine say, hey, I'm going to loan you this ship. You don't, this is, this ship's going to take care of you. You take care of it. I mean, that was really awesome. And for it to still be so advanced at the time of the Galactic Empire, which is some odd 20 some odd years, after episode 1. I think that makes the ship all the cooler, because it does have all these advancements that even when the Empire is at the top of its game, which in the Lando comic book series it would be, it's still that wildly advanced. Like, it reminds me in Knight Rider 2000 when, they're talking about how they sold kit for parts, right? Because it's supposed to be in like 20 years in the future from the last Knight Rider episode. And they said, it's like, for amazingly, the scientists at the time thought that, kit was still okay. It's like, and that shows how advanced they are, meaning that kit was still really advanced even 20 years into the future. I like the idea that the scimitar is still really advanced, even when you go 20 years into the future from when it was originally designed. And so, that, and it's cool that the Emperor still had it and that he's just like holding on to it for whenever one of his agents kind of needs it. It would have been awesome. I wouldn't have minded if Darth Vader ended up taking it over, but that didn't happen, and it ends up getting used by by other people. And hey, what the hell? That's cool. So yeah, I really, really love the Sith Infiltrator. Got such a great look, and again, especially at the time when you found out that it had a cloaking device. That was when you learn about cloaking devices in the Star Wars universe, especially in the old expanded universe. You find out that like it's this really, really tough technology to deal with. Like Thrawn uses it in the Heir to the Empire trilogy, right? And so to have such like a use of it and a practical use of it on a smaller ship, that really always stuck out for me. And I thought that was really cool. And I could just imagine, it being a specifically Sith ship, all the wild shit that, and maybe hedonistic shit that would happen on there, perhaps much like what would happen on the Libertine. But anyway, yeah, so Sith Infiltrator or the Scimitar, I'm going to give that number 5. And I still think, I don't think it didn't get destroyed at the end of the Lando comic series. The Imperialis did, which that was a beautiful ship too. The Imperialis was like the Emperor's personal space yacht, which that could have made this list because that was a really gorgeous thing too, and especially being loaded with Sith artifacts. I mean, what the hell, you can't go wrong with that. So yeah, number 5 with the Scimitar. Let's go to number 4. And number 4, this is the one where I think people are going to go, what the hell? What are you doing picking this? But I'm going to run with it. And what number 4 is actually, I know you're going to hate me. You're going to hate me. But this is the only one from The Force Awakens that's going to make it. And that is Starkiller Base. Now, look, I know. Set aside the fact, okay, like really, set aside the fact that it is just a copy, as it were, of the Death Star, okay? Nobody complained about the Death Star 1 and the Death Star 2. Like, nobody said, oh, the Death Star 2, oh, that's just copying A New Hope or something like that. Yeah, of course it was, like, on purpose. Like, that was the Emperor's idea, right? I think Starkiller Base was, take it, look at it in universe, not looking at it from the point that J.J. Abrams copied A New Hope. Okay, looking at it in universe, I think it makes sense. I mean, and this is something that actually happened throughout the old EU that some people complained about and some people liked. They just kept coming up with deadlier and deadlier weapons. They had to keep coming up with, more dastardly ships. Like, you'd have the Sun Crusher and I don't know, all these other different designs. One thing I liked actually in the old expanded universe was how Admiral Dalla, which that was so cool that we had a badass female admiral, especially one that was honestly hot. How she had the prototype, which that wouldn't be canon anymore. I think with like episode 3, you see, the Death Star actually getting built. So there probably isn't a prototype Death Star. And Rogue One kind of puts the kibosh on that too. But to have the prototype Death Star, where it's just kind of the skeleton and the laser pretty much, and a not as powerful laser, though maybe that could still fit in with new canon if they wanted to use an idea like that. I thought that was really cool that she had like a prototype Death Star. It's like, and I remember reading that in the Jedi Academy trilogy, back in the day, back in the 90s. And I was like, oh, fuck, that's a cool idea. So I like this of just constantly coming up with this bigger and deadlier, kind of thing. I mean, it's completely impractical, but the idea of just turning an entire planet into effectively a Death Star, I think it's kind of the logical conclusion of where you go with this stuff. And I don't know how you could get any bigger. If anything, the one thing we can be thankful for with the new trilogy, with the sequel trilogy, is that it has consistently, I think, taken things as big as they can possibly get, and so they're going to have to come up with new stuff in some way. Like, you look at was it the Supremacy? Was that the name of Snoke's main capital ship, where there's entire factories within it and everything, and it's his mobile base of operations? I mean, that's fine. But the idea of a planet, traveling in hyperspace or a moon anyway, like an actual moon, which is pretty much the concept. I mean, and you got to, look at the scale of just how big Starkiller Base is compared to, the Death Star 2. And it's massive, but I thought that was actually a really cool idea. I really like that. Now, I mean, the way that it ends up getting destroyed, things like this, that's another story. But and that it's the snowy planet and everything, I don't know. I love it. I mean, and this is, look, speaking from a scientific perspective, even though, again, Star Wars doesn't pay much attention to that sort of thing, a really practical way to make starships. Okay, and I mean this in reality, in real life, a real practical way to create starships would be to take an asteroid and hollow it out. Use the asteroid as your hull and just build the ship within it, add the engine to the fucking asteroid and everything that's already sitting up in space. I mean, that's an idea people have. That's part of what was that? The Anamanawa, whatever the fuck the name of it was, that came through our solar system. That some people were saying, oh, is that an alien craft? No, I don't think it was an alien craft, but I understood their argument for it being an alien craft, because they said, well, if you wanted to be, create a spacecraft, well, hollowing out an old asteroid isn't a bad idea. Just moving that asteroid around, especially a cigar-shaped cylindrical one, like Anamanamau or whatever the fuck the name of that was, that could make some degree of sense. And, the same could be said for the spherical shape to some degree of a planet. I mean, planets go throughout the stars anyway, so why not hollow one out and turn it into a weapon and slap a hyperdrive engine on it? I don't think it's a bad idea at all. I thought it was actually really cool. And of course, I'm kind of I'm what I call cryophilic, where I take great pleasure in the winter and in the snow. And so having that on there, yeah, I thought that was cool. I thought that was actually a really clever idea, because honestly, I would have never thought of it. Not like that. Not taking a whole moon or planet, and actually converting it, you know what I mean? Which I think that's the basic idea of what they did, and using the core of it to power it. Well, they suck everything off of a nearby star, and then they do. I mean, yeah, I thought it was cool. I didn't think it was a bad idea at all. So I got to give it to Starkiller Base, and excellent use of the word Starkiller, which is, a major part of Star Wars history, where originally, it was going to be Anakin Starkiller instead of Anakin Skywalker and all that. I thought that there was, and it fit, because the thing did kill stars, actual stars. So yeah, I dig it. I like what JJ did with that. Okay, let's move on to we'll get into our top 3 here. Number 3, this is going to go to, well, I hinted at this. I said that there's a ship in Rogue One that's actually going to make it into my top 8. And this does. I thought that this was damned clever, this ship. I mean, I really thought it was. So, all right. Something that happened in the old EU was they seemed to be just coming up with these wacky ass designs at the time for, in this case, New Republic, because usually it'd be after the rebellion. For they'd have the E-Wing, they'd have the V-Wing, they'd have all these different ones where they were just trying to somehow squeeze a letter in to and make a ship look somewhat like that letter, and they just kept coming up with new ones. I mean, I don't know how many letters they didn't use, really, to come up with all these different styles of ships. And it just started to get ridiculous, because you were sacrificing good design just to make it look like a letter of the alphabet, right? And it really didn't make sense. But I have to give it to the guys, when they were doing Rogue One, when they came up with the U-Wing And I think they knew they had a winner on their hands with this, because the U-Wing was one of, kind of like how the Naboo Starfighter was part of the original promotional, or one of the original promotional materials released for Episode 1. The U-Wing was one of the original promotional materials released for Rogue One. And it was a winner. Like, I think everybody that saw it when they first talked about it on the Star Wars show, long before the movie came out, everybody was like, oh yeah, that's cool. And I agree. I think it's very cool. When it comes to Star Wars, I am a, like, what you could call a Sith Imperial guy. I generally like the bad guys better than I like the good guys, and the good organizations within the series. So I don't have many like Rebel, or Republic ships or anything like that in my, personal collection that sits in the BDSM studios. But the U-Wing is one of them. I did pick up a little model of the U-Wing because I just thought it was so cool. So it does look like a U, but what's really clever is that the forward-facing struts, pylons, whatever you want to call those, they actually, when it goes into atmospheric flight, or when it goes into more of an attack mode in space, those can rotate back to where actually it looks more like a Y, but they can rotate back, and it just has this really cool, impressive like wingspan, really long, large wingspan. And it works. And I love the idea of a starfighter, and because it does function as a starfighter, where a starfighter actually has more of a cargo hold to it, and it can be a transport as much as it can be, an attack fighter, which that's kind of new for Star Wars, but something I always wanted. Like, I mean, one of the reasons I used to, and really what the U-Wing unseated was the B-Wing, which I always thought was a really cool ship. But the thing I liked about the B-Wing was that, like, there was especially in the old expanded universe, you had the expanded cockpit where you could fit 2 or 3 people or whatever in it. The idea of having that agile starfighter style, but that could fit a bunch of people into it. I like that. And again, I mean, you just look at the U-Wing and, its flight configuration, all the different ways that it goes, like, it just makes sense. It's one of the ones where, okay, no, you guys got it. Like the X-Wing, you understand why the X-Wing's called the X-Wing. You understand why the Y-Wing's called the Y-Wing. And the U-Wing, like, okay, you went with the letter, but you actually made it make sense. And it really does make sense. And the way that it moves and everything, and the way that they used it within the movie Rogue One was very well done. Before it's even landing, you got guys jumping out of the belly of it and everything. I mean, it really, really worked. For me personally, like I thought it was just an awesome, awesome design. So got to give it to the U-Wing as far as, probably the best ship to come out of new Star Wars. Has got to be the U-Wing. I mean, and it speaks to Rogue One, just how great an idea and how great of a movie Rogue One was when, I think a lot of people can still make the argument, now after seeing it, could still make the argument that, yeah, we really didn't need Solo a Star Wars story. Like, that movie really didn't tell us anything new. Not really. I mean, it gave us some little insights here and there into stories that we already knew, but it really is telling stories that we kind of already knew. As to where, Rogue One was genuine extrapolation on something we didn't know. And I think a lot of people felt, it's like, wait a minute, we're making a movie out of like one little line in the opening crawl of A New Hope. What the fuck is this? But then when you saw it, you're like, oh yeah, we needed that. And I still say that it's improved upon my viewing of Episode 4. And I mean, if anything, for fuck's sakes, folks, we needed that Darth Vader scene at the end, and you know it. I mean, we needed that. Like, where were our lives without that Darth Vader scene at the end? I mean, that's still so nuts. I still think about that and I just go, Jesus, that was nice job. That was worth the whole movie just to get that payoff of when Vader, just starts slicing down those rebels, man. Oh, yeah. So anyway, how did I even get on that? I was saying, like, Rogue One, we didn't think we needed that movie either, but now that we have it, we're like, yeah, I always want that, and we're always going to remember it. And that speaks to it. There's a lot of brilliance that went into that film, and the U-Wing is definitely one of them. But, all right, let's move on from that. Let's get into number 2. And this definitely fits in at number 2. Not that it's shit, quite the opposite. But this fits in at number 2. And speaking of Solo a Star Wars story, of course, this is very much the star of Solo a Star Wars story, as much as Lando, Han, or Chewie would be. And that is the Millennium Falcon. This ship is... You look at it and like how it has that side cockpit, and actually I think Solo Star Wars Story is the first time we actually had it confirmed in film that it was a YT-1300. Maybe they talked about YT-1300s in Rebels, and you get that classification. But I think that might be the first time. To some degree, I like the YT-2400 better, which is canon because it's in A New Hope now, thanks to the special editions, which was made famous in Shadows of the Empire, Dash Rendar's ship, the Outrider. But particularly the Millennium Falcon. We're not just talking about any YT-1300 here. It wouldn't seem to make sense, having that cockpit on the side and then having so much ship to the rest of it, to the left of it, I guess you could say. But man, it's just iconic. It's just iconic. I do have a model of the Millennium Falcon, actually the model from episode 3, where it has like the blue paint design and everything on it, which I thought it was cool that in Solo Star Wars Story, Lando does make it very clear very early on that I've made modifications to it. He's made modifications to it. He's added things to it. So the Millennium Falcon wasn't originally his either. And that would explain why you see it in episode 3. And yes, deal with it. That is, George Lucas has made it abundantly clear that is the Millennium Falcon on Coruscant in episode 3. So I was worried how the canon connections would work there, but again, this is one of the shining points of Solo: A Star Wars Story. Wherever else it may fail at being formulaic, one of the things it certainly did right that a lot of Star Wars movies recently had not, is that it had tons of canon connections and answered a lot of questions, or at least gave us, some explanation to things. And I could get into a lot of spoiler territory with Solo: A Star Wars Story, talking about the Millennium Falcon, but you do learn so much more about the ship, and I think that, it just adds on to the aura and the mystique of this incredible vessel. I love the fact that the Falcon is still part of the sequel trilogy. In fact, I love in The Last Jedi when they're on Crate and it swoops in and saves the day, as it should. That's kind of like something the Falcon does, right? Is it's just always in the right place at the right time. That's been the situation since A New Hope. And it, and when Finn says, "Oh man, they hate that ship," I thought that was funny as hell. I was like, "Yeah, that's cool, baby," because it is. It is such a cool ship. Just the attitude around it. It was, and a lot of other science fiction creators and directors, directors that have been involved in science fiction and all that, and and science fiction fans have widely recognized that the Falcon specifically, Star Wars did it in general, but the Falcon was really the culmination of it. It gave you that sense of a very lived-in universe, right? This looked old, as to where a lot of science fiction, especially in pre-77 and even after, was very clean and sterile. The Millennium Falcon was none of that. It was dirty. It was, it was a mess. There were parts everywhere. It gave you a very unique feel, with that ship. It was trend setting, and I don't think anything's ever really, really matched up to it either. But it's such a cool ship, and the way that the maneuvers that it does throughout the original trilogy are so awesome. And maybe, it is so symbolic of Star Wars itself. It might be the most symbolic, more so than the X-Wing, more so than the Star Destroyer. And, credit to the ship. And I think what really, still puts it over the top for me, as far as being, just one of the best ships in Star Wars, is when you had the original teaser trailer for The Force Awakens. Two things. You get one, like there's the point where you're just getting flashes of what happens, in the movie, right? This is the original teaser. And then suddenly the music hits, the Star Wars theme hits, and all it is just the Falcon just, boom, just, hitting a sonic boom pretty much and just going straight up on Jakku. And man, like you felt it, that it just, kind of spins around and flies around, and you're like, yeah, that's Star Wars, baby. And then of course the classic moment when Han Solo, in the trailers and of course in the movie as well, when Han Solo, comes in and says, Chewie, we're home. I mean, everybody's crying, you know what I mean, when they see that. Or even when, in The Last Jedi, when Luke Skywalker's walking around on and he turns everything on in the bridge. I remember when I saw that in the trailer, and you just instantly felt, all the nostalgia comes in, and everything that you love about Star Wars all comes together, and it's all tied in with that ship. There's no way it has, in my opinion, as far as if you counted Star Wars ships in like a greatest science fiction or greatest starships list, like that was just kind of broad. If you included Star Wars in that, which I didn't when I did mine, it has to make that list on any Star Wars, starship list. It has to make the list at the top, or very close to the top, because it's just so important. It's as much a part of Star Wars as any lightsaber, as any other part of it, as Darth Vader, as any of it. It is just absolutely iconic. And it does have a grace and a beauty to it, in what it does. And I love the hot rod nature of it. I mean, definitely George Lucas had that in mind when he put it together. I love that aspect. There's just so much to love about it, and even the fact that, like, may not look like much, but it's got it where it counts. Like, I love that kind of tech ethos of where it's a surprise, right? You don't expect a ship like that to be able to do all this stuff, to go that fast and be that powerful, etc. So yeah, it's got so much going for it. I absolutely love it. So Millennium Falcon at number 2. Let's go to number 1. And of course, I already said what number 1 was in a previous episode, previous top 8 that we were doing throughout May with this series. But the number 1 has to go to, for me personally, has to go to the TIE Defender. The TIE Defender is a TIE fighter that has 3 actual, like, wing structures. And the structures look like reverse wings that they're really panels, but I'll call them wings, reverse wings, or, solar panels that the TIE Interceptor has. So this ship's prestige doesn't really come from what it was, that it was like a secret project by Grand Admiral Thrawn, though I love that too. And I love the fact that in Star Wars Rebels, they talk about how actually Grand Moff Tarkin said he was much more interested in the TIE Defender than he was in the Death Star itself. And actually, if you remember back in the old EU, you had during the Thrawn trilogy, Thrawn fits TIE interceptors with shields. And he says that, look, this like mass production and all this stuff, he says that was a failing idea on the Emperor's part. And it speaks well of Tarkin, that Tarkin recognized, oh, no, we want ships with shields. And that's the thing, is that the TIE Defender, next to the TIE Advanced X-1 that Vader had, was the first one where it was the first TIE fighter where we knew it had shields, right? I mean, now with the First Order, you know that the TIE Fighter LN, which is the newer one, or the Special Forces, whatever version of it, that has shields as well, because most TIE fighters don't. So it had shields, so that, that's one point in its favor. But again, really where it shined was in the 1994 classic game, in my opinion, the greatest game ever made, bar none, doesn't matter Star Wars or otherwise, TIE Fighter, which, as I always say, the game TIE Fighter, it's not just a video game, it's a lifestyle, and oh yes it is. In fact, it's funny, you can go to read the reviews for TIE Fighter, like on Steam or on GOG, and they are hilarious, because the guys will write, it's like, this will put hair on your chest, like that's the title of the review, or this game will make a man out of you. I mean, it's that big deal of a game, and the TIE Defender was the ultimate end of what you got, if you got far enough in the game. You get to fly around in the TIE Defender. I mean, this thing has all the weapons you could want. It has the ion cannons, blaster cannons, has, torpedoes. And then it also has, and this was the really cool part within the game, it had a tractor beam built onto it. Now, you could say, well, it's just a tractor beam. What's the big deal? The big deal was that in the game TIE Fighter, with the TIE Defender, you could get behind an X-Wing, right? And you could fire up the tractor beam, and that would freeze the X-Wing in front of you. And then you just start blasting away at that rebel scum, and it's over. I mean, it was so cool. I mean, it felt like a cheat, but well, here it is. You give me the power, I'm going to use it. And oh man, I mean, that ship is just so cool. And the look of it is really unique. And, you can just imagine it spinning around a lot and everything. I mean, it's so cool. It's been used to fair effect in Star Wars Rebels, where it's given its prominence as like, this is a really advanced fighter. This is really cool. We got to do something about this, or this is going to destroy the rebellion and everything. I mean, they gave it its proper due and respect. And I'd be happy if it comes back again in some form or fashion. Hell, have something that looks like it show up in Episode 9. I'm totally game with that. There's already been theories that Thrawn will show up in Episode 9. Have him come in with a fleet of TIE Defenders, that are wildly advanced. I would be the happiest guy on Earth if I saw that on screen. I mean, that would be phenomenal. So I'm glad that it was brought into the new canon with Star Wars Rebels. Dave Filoni did the Dark Lord's work, in my opinion, in doing so. I mean, we're not getting, like, there were some cool ideas for like board games and everything where actually the Royal Guard, the Emperor's Royal Guard, would fly around in red TIE Defenders. I thought that was a really, really badass idea. I would love for that to actually be a thing. Of course, they also had red TIE Interceptors at one point, but regardless, the TIE Defender is the ultimate TIE fighter. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's the ultimate, in my opinion, it's the ultimate symbol really of what the Empire could be, right? The Star Destroyer and the Death Star are obviously the iconic symbols of the Empire. But I think that the TIE Defender, the TIE Fighter is whatever, is an instantaneous thing that people recognize like right away. And I think the TIE Defender is, again, it's the ultimate conclusion of that line, of that design. And I also liked the TIE Phantom, but I didn't include it in this list because it doesn't fit in, it's not technically part of the new canon. And I only wanted to do one ship that was in the old canon. So the TIE Phantom was cool because that had a cloaking device that was originally part of the game Rebel Assault 2. And I mean, it looked kind of like the TIE Defender, but the solar panels were like single claw instead of double claw, like you see on the TIE Interceptors. But that had an awesome design too. I really like the TIE Phantom. Could have made the list if we were still in the old canon. It easily would have made the list. But the TIE Defender just takes them all, and for so many reasons, and because it's really, when you see the TIE Defender, you don't think Star Wars Rebels. Star Wars fans think one thing. They think TIE Fighter. And look, folks, regardless of what expanded universe and new canon and whatever the hell else anybody comes up with in Star Wars, the bottom line is that the greatest thing to ever come out of Star Wars, because it's the greatest fucking video game ever made, is TIE Fighter. And so it stands above all. It stands above all canons. It stands above everything. And no one is ever going to match, what I think that game delivered at the time that it delivered. And, pick it up on GOG. You can buy the game for cheap. It's as much fun today. Yeah, the graphics kind of stink right now, but they're charming, I think, today. It stands, and you see why people are so obsessed with it. And it's still just as much gold as it was back then. And more so than, really, I want to comment. We're going to wrap this up because I don't want it to go more than an hour. But I want to talk about this for a second. I don't even think games like Free Space, or I don't think that even games like, if Squadron 42 or Star Citizen, whatever, if that actually became a thing, none of the Wing Commanders, you can say that there are bigger games out there. I don't know, Elite Dangerous, go down the fucking list of them. None of those games, for whatever reason, really captured what I think actually made TIE Fighter the greatness that it is, and what makes people think of it, honestly, like as a lifestyle, is because there was this, and it was so simply done, because, I mean, you could only do things that simple back in 1994 on a PC, right? Was the storyline, and not just the storyline, not because the story isn't like that great. But what was amazing is that you had this like dark aura where you had the characters that worked for the kind of the secret cabal for the Emperor, right? They were part of the Emperor's hand or whatever, or that was one of the ranks that you could get. But you had that secret order within the Empire that worked for the Emperor. You see the guy with the cloak, and you go and talk to him while your ship is docked and everything. And he's like, "Hey, we've got these secret missions for you." That filled you just with this sense of, "Ooh, I am a bad boy," And nothing else really captures that. And I don't know why that is. Maybe just that they don't have the clout of story like that these other games, these other flight simulator games that are technically more impressive and allow you to do so much more, and that you could really live in those universes, like, No Man's Sky or something like that. In a very real sense, you could live in them, much like you would in World of Warcraft. but none of them have that sense of like darkness and belonging to that darkness. And maybe it's because none of those other franchises have a character like Emperor Palpatine. That's the only thing I can imagine. But that's the secret sauce that TIE Fighter, the game TIE Fighter brought, I think it gave you a sense of belonging. Like you're part of the secret club, and you get the tattoos and everything. I mean, I've never really wanted to get a tattoo, but I've always said if I was ever going to get a tattoo, I would get all the tattoos that you earn in the game TIE Fighter right on my left arm. I mean, because it's just so badass, and yeah, and the TIE Defender, it's the symbol of that. And so it sits at number 1 easily for me as far as Star Wars ships go. So there's your Star Wars starships and starfighters top 8. I don't think I'm going to do anything else within this series. This is just a fun series to do throughout May, and to lay out some more geeky science fiction-y shit and whatever else. It ended up being a 4-part series, and people seem to really enjoy it and talk about it. Star Wars, I'll tell you, it's easy to talk about Star Wars and to get into the nitty-gritty with Star Wars. First off, because I've been reading Star Wars technical manuals for most of my life and still do. So, I know CNR fleet systems, I can tell you all the different guys, who built the Y-Wings. Well, it's Cohen Sayer, I know all this shit. So it's very easy to talk about as far as that goes. And perhaps even more so, even though Star Trek is, in my opinion, objectively superior to Star Wars, Star Wars, they really, really, really built up a lot of details in their universe. Star Trek did too, but okay, who built what? So the Galaxy class is built on Utopia Planitia yards, that, but okay, Starfleet just builds everything, and it's this kind of post-scarcity society, and so nobody really gives a shit, and so little attention is paid to most alien ships within Star Trek, as to where in Star Wars, tons of attention is paid to just about any ship that's out there, and whole books are sold on them, you know what I mean? So it's something that you can get really nitty-gritty with, more so than any other universe, I think. And that speaks into the lived-in nature and part of the appeal of Star Wars, is that it can feel very, very real, in that it's so well detailed, more so than Lord of the Rings, more so I think even than Star Trek, really. Though, Star Trek, the characters better than the universe. As to where with Star Wars, you know more of the universe than you do so much of the characters. There's kind of an opposite effect there, and they come with different mentalities. So anyway, but yeah, this was a fun little 4-part series that we did throughout May. I do plan on picking up possibly in June with the audiobooks. Actually, I know there's one audiobook that's going to come out in June, but it's not what you think. And we got all kinds of wild stuff, of course, to come out for patrons. And thank you to, I know we got a couple new patrons recently. Thank you for coming on board. And hey, if the geeky shit's not for you, don't worry. We do tons of hardware reviews. We do the Q&As. You can ask questions. You get to take control of the content on Patreon. So there you have it, folks. I will see all of you, on the other side. And hey, if you haven't, go see Solo. Really, go. It's not bad. It's not a bad movie at all. Go enjoy it. Anyway, I'll see you on the other side.